Why, hello everybody. How's it going out there? It's 92 degrees in here and I'm sweating in an old wool sport coat. So this is the best I can do right now for you, okay? I'm sweating to death. But here's the thing right now. I want to make this video real quick about reel-to-reels in regards to making adjustments of the tape heads on a reel-to-reel. And I guess this could be accounted for with higher end cassette decks that allow you to make these adjustments, but it's a little bit more difficult on cassette decks than it can be for reel-to-reel decks, because on cassette decks you can really only adjust the bias. On reel-to-reel decks you can adjust the height, and you can adjust the azimuth with just a screw right there. And it's so freaking easy to do, and it just blows my mind. Here, let me lower the volume on the microphone here so I don't peak it. It just blows my mind the amount of complexity on the YouTube videos that you watch out there about adjusting the azimuth and height, making adjustments to tape heads on reel-to-reel decks. Now, this is my setup in my basement right now with the TX 7030 GSL and an MCI JH110. Now, this is what the mechanism of the TX 7030 GSL looks like. It has 4 heads where you can make adjustments on the azimuth and on the height. And then on the back of the unit, as you can see here, you can make bias adjustments for recording and playback. Here is the crazy thing that no one is telling you. There are 2 big myths about this, about aligning tape heads. Actually, 3 big myths. The first is that you need to be an experienced technician to align tape heads on a reel-to-reel machine, when this is one of the easiest tasks there is. Number two, you need an oscilloscope. That is such a myth. Don't make things more complicated than they have to be or more expensive than they have to be. And then number 3, the third myth out there is that you need an expensive reference tape. The only guys making reference tapes right now, as you can see, is MRL. And they charge hundreds of dollars on their website for you to order so-called reference tapes. And these reference tapes provide clear tones for you to adjust your bias, your azimuth. Now, here's the big thing that nobody tells you about adjusting reel-to-reel decks, like TX, like Akai's, is that a lot of these were consumer decks. These are consumer model reel-to-reel decks, which means that most likely you are not going to be making recordings on these decks. And if you're not making recordings and you're only playing back, then you don't need an oscilloscope and you don't need a reference tape. The reference tape is for adjusting the azimuth and adjusting the bias on your record heads if you're going to be making recordings in a professional studio where you're using the same brand of tape over and over again. You have one solid reference to go by. But if you're like me and you have consumer decks, because I have a collection of hundreds and hundreds of reel-to-reel tapes, right? You understand that? Hundreds and hundreds of tapes means that they were recorded on different machines with different azimuth settings, and they're all different brand tapes. So you really have no reference to go by except adjusting the azimuth for every single tape you're going to use. And that's what I do for all of my captures. When I capture a pre-recorded tape and play it back on one of my consumer decks, all you have to do is adjust the azimuth screw until you get the highest frequency response playing it by ear. You put on your tape that you want to hear and you adjust the screw of the azimuth until it sounds good to you. You don't need an expensive hundreds of dollars of a reference tape, and you don't need an oscilloscope. The oscilloscope is just really for the record head. When you want a 10 kilohertz reference tone and you want a standard and you're going to be setting the alignment of the record head. But if you're not making recordings, it doesn't matter as much at all. You don't really need it. Another thing you can do actually is if you are going to be making a recording and you don't want to buy a oscilloscope, to have a reference tone, you can actually hook up a high quality source like a music from a CD or iTunes or something, play it back, and then listen back and forth until you get the highest frequency response by adjusting the azimuth. And that's really all it is. What you get from the azimuth is you get you'll hear it when you get to that perfect spot, the most signal to noise ratio, where you have the highest frequency response. That's what you want. And then your other adjustment that you'll see on reel-to-reel decks is the height. And you simply play it by your vision. You simply eyeball it and you take off the cover and you look to see that it's touching, it's all even. It's not like underneath or above it. It's right on the highest point, the tip of the playback head, where it should be. And that's it. Those are the only adjustments. And then you've got your bias. With cassette decks, you really only have the bias, and it's a lot harder to adjust the height and everything like that. But with reel-to-reel decks, it's real simple. And for somebody like me who archives my collection and I want my tapes to sound the best, since each tape is a different brand and they were recorded on all different machines, I am actually adjusting the azimuth for every single tape that I play to get the best sound out of it. And that's what you have to do. A reference tape is for recording and an oscilloscope is for recording. Excuse me, I screwed that up. A reference tape is for playback and an oscilloscope is for recording. If you use a reference tape for playback, that's for setting a standard if you're in a studio where you will be using the same brand of tape at the same speed. But that's completely irrelevant when you're talking about pre-recorded reel-to-reels on consumer decks where you won't be making recordings, you don't need an oscilloscope. So these are some quotes from members on the Tapeheads forum that can explain it better than me. And these are serious professionals who have been in the field for 30, 40 years. They own their own stores. And so this is a quote from Magnetic Blood. And he says, "A perfect adjusted azimuth exists only in theory. In real life, on a certain cassette or reel-to-reels, this azimuth can vary. A good player will have easy adjustable azimuth. Nakamachi plastic gears on 480 and 3 headers. So you did right adjusting for your ear. If you have a good ear and you do it properly. After all, you are listening to the cassette or reel-to-reel, and this is all about your ears. Nakamichi understood this and did a nice job in an imperfect shell. So for perfect listening of certain tape, you sometimes need to adjust for the specific tape. This makes the Dragon unbeatable as a player." And that goes along with reel-to-reel or anything. This is from Analog Ronin. He's in Shinzu, Japan. 1,346 posts. This, he pointed upwards. "A trained ear is an excellent resource. The sound is about what you hear, not a scope display. Setting by ear, I come up 99.99% correct as measured electronically. Verified across multiple decks, test tapes, recording playback on A and B sides. There's too many variables for the thing to be 1,000% correct all of the time. If it sounds good, it sounds good." So then we scroll down and there's more. Let's go to Pacific Stereo because Pacific Stereo is the founder of this forum and he owns the Pacific Stereo out in California, the repair shop, and he's been a tech for 40 years in the field. And he says, yes, forcing to mono will get you exceptionally close. So that's basically what you do. If you have a mono switch, your ears could detect it easier. And coming from dullness to clarity works always perfect on my CR7. Pacific Stereo says, yes, forcing to mono will get you exceptionally close. And then even if you don't have a mono switch, you can make mono headphones cables. So basically, I'm going to show you a diagram, and this is the diagram right here. So this is what the diagram looks like. If you make a short headphone cord, basically, with the ground lifted, when you get a null in the signal, which means that the signal phases out, and you can hear that by ear. The azimuth is pretty spot on with any tape you are using. In stereo, most of the lead vocal and bass are centered and should null out or be very low in volume. That's when your azimuth is locked, basically. And so basically you go from a TRS plug to headphone amp out, and then TRS jack to headphones. Inputting a 1 kilohertz tone should play back sounding like bacon frying if all is tuned up. It's like hearing the magnetic particles themselves. So it's actually very easy and it's very simple to do. So I wanted to show you guys another great website, hi-fivision.com forum, and there's another answer that was given to this azimuth question by a member named TCPIP, not to be confused with PCP. Anyways, we scroll down to the bottom right here, and he goes about how to calibrate everything, and you have to use an oscilloscope. But then you get to the bottom right here, and it says pre-recorded cassettes. Ready for this? Pre-recorded cassettes will play imperfectly even on the best decks. You heard that right. Pre-recorded cassettes or reel-to-reels will play imperfectly even on the best decks. Even the best tape decks, the Knox ZX9, CR7, the Tandberg 3014, and the Revox B215. Now those are thousands and thousands of dollars on the used market. They are the best tape decks that were ever made. If they're all aligned and calibrated as per factory spec, will be only average or mediocre when playing back a set of pre-recorded material obtained from different publishers. Each of these decks will accidentally have their playback azimuth alignment very closely aligned with some of your cassettes, but will have poor alignment with other cassettes, and there will be nothing you can do about it. The manufacturers of, now get this, this is the most important part of this paragraph. The manufacturers of pre-recorded cassettes, especially in India, on the whole, did not follow close tolerances when manufacturing their cassettes. They even followed mass manufacture processes, which make such close tolerances impossible to obtain consistently. Therefore, even the world's best decks are going to be only average when retrieving the last bit of high-frequency information from a bunch of pre-recorded cassettes. And now they give an exception, and this is important to read. The only exception is a correctly working Dragon with a correctly aligned NAAC subsystem. And that is because the Dragon adjusts the azimuth for every single tape, and you can do that manually with any reel-to-reel deck. It's a lot harder to do that on a cassette. But this is proving my point, that what I'm getting at here is that no pre-recorded material has optimal azimuth. You have to change the azimuth for anything that you're playing if you want the optimal frequency response. So that's the diagram that I showed you. That's basically it. But there's only one other caveat when it comes to doing it this way. If you have a used reel-to-reel where the tape heads have a flat spot, if you don't have new heads or you don't have it relapped, what can happen is if you change the azimuth from where it was traditionally, where the tape was going across the heads, you have sharp edges along the tape heads and the tape transport. And if you move the azimuth from where it was already calibrated, it can cause great damage to all of your tapes that you're playing. But that's only if your machine was dependent on a single brand of tape. So many times in like a professional studio, they would have BASF tape or a quantity tape, and they would only use that tape. They would only use that tape for 30 years. And then they would switch a brand and realize, oh crap, my flat spot has sharp edges and the different tapes have different widths on them. So when you play them and you're dependent on one brand, and you're a professional recording studio, then you're going to have damage to your tapes. But that's not the case if you have, like, you're a hobbyist on a pre-recorded machine and you're playing hundreds of tapes from 30 different brands, and all different widths, shapes, and sizes and speeds, it's not going to have a distinct flat spot unless you have been playing the same kind of tapes. So actually, what I recommend is before you adjust the azimuth, to relap your tape heads, because if there is any sharp edges on the flat spot of the head, you want that to be rounded off, and that's what relapping the heads do on any machine. My tape, my TAC deck, has new heads that John from JRF Magnetic put on, and this is a picture of my little basement set up with all of my reel-to-reels that I will be archiving onto this channel. And I have new heads, so it's okay to adjust the azimuth. This is a most famous example that I will tell you now. It was actually with Quantigy. The story is when Quantigy folded, RMGI kicked in. And when RMGI kicked in, it was 0.001 to 0.002 inches wider. The wear patterns on the heads and guides were a nightmare for people using the new tape. And it was Shed City for some people. So it's called the phenomenon of tape shedding. That's what it's called. And a lot of people had that issue when they switch brands. But you can adjust the azimuth just like a knock deck, a Nakamichi deck. That's why they have auto azimuth, because every cassette is different that was recorded on a different machine. So all of these people that say you need to buy a $1,000 oscilloscope, you have to send it to a tech and spend $1,000 to turn a screw, and they have to adjust it to the correct phase and everything. There is no such thing as a correct azimuth. Let me repeat that. There is no such thing as a correct azimuth if we're talking about playing back tape. Now, if you're going to be recording with tape in a recording studio, that's different. That's different, of course. But if you are just playing back hundreds of reels or hundreds of cassettes that were recorded on unknown machines with all different azimuth settings, then you can actually adjust the screw yourself until you get the clearest signal. And that's how you optimize azimuth for every single tape. And that's the best way to get the most out of your tapes. They're not to adjust it with an oscilloscope to one standard, because every single machine is different. It could have been calibrated differently. You don't know. So to get the most out of your tapes, you can actually take out the ground out of a headphone cable, listen to it, and if you get like the snare drum and the basically the mono parts, once they disappear, once they null out, that means that your azimuth is almost spot on. And that was the old way of doing it. If you're a professional recording studio that has clients and you're using the same brand tape and you want the optimal setting to record with, of course, use an oscilloscope and get it professionally calibrated. But if you're playing back tape decks as an archival studio and you want to get the most out of your tapes, it's actually better to adjust the azimuth to each tape. And you do that by simply listening with your ears. And you adjust one screw. That's it. This is the diagram on my machine. Anyone can do this, although I recommend not getting a Phillips screwdriver to get the Japanese standard, and I forget off the top of my head what it's called, but you know, and you can look it up, because that's the Japanese decks that did not use Phillips screws. And if you do use a Phillips screwdriver, you're going to strip your azimuth adjustment. And if you're making your azimuth adjustments often, then you really don't want to be using a Phillips screwdriver, because that can strip it. They use the same kind of screwdrivers on Japanese motorcycles. And that's really it. That is so easy. It is so easy to adjust the azimuth. This is how you do it. And for those who say that you need an oscilloscope because that's the only way you get accurate azimuth, the goal is to get an accurate azimuth with the tape you're using to get the best sound. And anyone who says this is incorrect, then how do you explain cassette decks that changed the azimuth, like the Dragons, that would change the azimuth to adjust to each tape you were playing? Because the techs at Nakamichi understood that every tape that was recorded on different machines have different azimuth optimal adjustment that needs to be made. And that's the correct way. And I've talked to so many professionals in the field, and they all say the same thing. That is how you properly adjust the azimuth on a reel-to-reel deck, on a cassette deck, although good luck doing it on a cassette deck. It's almost impossible. It's harder. Reel-to-reel decks are very easy. It's a screw. You turn it with the screwdriver, and you're done. You listen with your ears, and people have gotten as close as an oscilloscope, but you're going to want to use your ears because every tape, if you're playing back, pre-recorded material is different. And as reel-to-reels age, as analog tape ages, its azimuth changes as well as the tape wears down. And so you really can't depend on some standard that everybody says is the correct way to do it, because they don't know what they're talking about when it comes to pre-recorded material and the archive world. Yes, for the professional world, not for hobbyists like you or me that have 20, 30 plus different brand of tapes that have an unknown history to them. That is a totally different scenario. And so we're on our own. This is the wild, wild west, because all of the guys that built these decks back in the 1950s and 60s are gone. And nobody services these decks anymore, so we all have to make the repairs ourselves. It says for professional only, do not open. I love it. There's no places that can service these decks anymore. You can't walk into a reel-to-reel, you can't walk into Best Buy with a reel-to-reel machine without getting security called on you and escorted out of the building. They'll think you're nuts. You can't get your tape serviced anywhere. You have to do it yourself, and it's a lot easier than people make it out to be. And I just wanted to put this video on YouTube because all of the other videos make it seem so complicated, and they don't know what they're talking about when it comes to the hobbyist and archive world that is completely different. So that's the right way to do it. There is no correct way. And that's the truth. Anyways, thank you for watching this channel. And I'm sure I'm shadow banned, and that's why I get 10 views on a video. But don't worry, there's going to be more uploads coming, and I'm going to get a better microphone eventually. And we're going to start getting all of this music out there. And this is going to be like me, the disc jockey, at Direct Dubs Project. And we're going to get unknown bands, unknown talent on cassette, on reel-to-reel, on VHS tape, and we're going to get it out to you for free, and you can download the high resolution link. But it takes time and it takes money to get all these decks working and back to normal. I mean, this is like a 4-year project. So hang in there, be patient. It doesn't make me any money by doing this. So this is costing a lot of money. That's why it's taking so long, but it will happen. All of these other YouTube channels out there, basically, they're afraid of copyright strikes on their channel, and they don't want to get music out there. But this channel will be dedicated to just music and get other people's music that cannot be struck down for copyright. Because I don't have affiliate links. I don't care if my channel gets demonetized like other people. And I'm sharing unreleased tapes that don't have copyright on them. And so it's fair use. Anyways, you have a good one, folks. Thanks for watching.